Thank you, Senator Tester.
I want to thank the chairman and ranking member. I want to thank both you secretaries for being here today. I appreciate the work you do. I appreciate the difficulty of the work you do. I want to touch quickly on why we're here, and that's a supplemental to help Israel and help Ukraine with humanitarian aid and infrastructure money for subs in particular. I want to start by saying the attack on October 7th by Hamas on Israel uh, was horrific, and it is critical that we provide our ally with the necessary tools to defeat Hamas. And I want to thank you too for working in that way, because we cannot allow terror and enemies of democracy to win. And that is why it is critical that this committee shows the leadership so Congress can deliver a package that supports Israel and counters Vladimir Putin. I happen to believe that America is the greatest country that's ever existed on the face of the earth. And we need to support Israel. We need to make sure we're standing up to Russia. And I think we're able to walk and chew gum at the same time. I want to be very clear today, as chairman of the Defense Subcommittee that sets the Defense Department's budget. I'll be working with Republicans and Democrats and colleagues to deliver a package that replenishes America's weapon stock, supports our Democratic allies, and sends a clear message to the enemies of freedom and democracy that they will not prevail. My question is this. This is for you, Secretary Austin. Can you talk about the supplemental requests for Ukraine? How much of that is staying here to resupply our industrial base in this country? It's being spent in this country for our security to replenish that industrial base.
For Ukraine?
Yes.
Okay, so thanks, Senator. We're asking for $44.4 billion in support of Ukraine. It's an $18 billion of that amount goes to enable us to replenish our stocks. And so we would purchase American weapons and munitions from American companies to do that. $12 billion of that amount goes to support the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. And so this is buying new products, new weapons, new munitions from American companies. $5 billion of that supports our troops who are currently deployed, overseas. We surged a number of brigades to Europe as this began, and we have to sustain them. And then $2.7 billion of that amount goes to expansion of facilities to increase capacity and accelerate production of critical munitions. And then finally, $1 billion for the acquisition of critical defense articles, which includes munitions as well. So this money is going right back into the coffers of America, and it's going to create jobs. It's going to sustain jobs. It's going to provide opportunities for Americans. I think you know, Senator, that the first four supplementals that we asked you for and we received bipartisan support on, over $27 billion of that money that we received was invested in over 30 states here in the United States, and I think that's real money going in the pockets of Americans. So.
And in the end, this supplemental will make the United States stronger, correct?
That's correct, Senator.
We've heard a lot about whether Ukraine really needs some money or not. I listened to a talk show this weekend, and they said there's not the urgency like there is in Israel. I think there's urgency on both, by the way. Could you talk to me about, if we don't pass supplemental that includes Ukraine, how long Ukraine has before Putin becomes successful?
It's hard to put an exact timeline on how long it would take, Senator, but I can guarantee you that without our support, Putin will be successful. And while the Ukrainians have done amazing work, with our help in terms of the things that we provided them, if we pull the rug out from under them now, Putin will only get stronger, and he will be successful in doing what he wants to do in acquiring his neighbor's sovereign territory.
I would just hope that this committee shows the leadership that I know we have sitting on both sides of the dais to do the right thing here and get a supplemental out that works for our national security. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We need to support Israel. There's no question about it. They're fighting for their very existence. We see that. We need to help them and support them, not just in this package, but beyond that. I believe we also need to support Ukraine. When you look at history, we understand very clearly that tyrants like Putin don't stop. They have to be stopped. So we need to do those things, but we also need to secure the homeland. And that means securing our border. And there's about $13.6 billion in this package requested relative to the border and immigration. Secretary Blinken last month, 270,000 illegal encounters, people trying to cross illegally at the southern border. That's a record. 2.5 million last year. And 169 individuals trying to cross that are on the terrorist watch list. Border security is national security, and I'm trying to understand how $14 billion to house, transport, and provide other services to individuals coming here illegally won't just encourage more to come. So my question to you is, how is it that you're going to assure us here today, and we'll ask Secretary Mayorkas in a week, that you're going to secure the southern border? Because I think for a lot of folks, when we're talking about national security, they want to see how that's going to happen. And we're going to want to be assured of that. How are you going to assure us that this is going to actually happen, that it's not $14 billion for more people to come here illegally?
Thank you, Senator. First, I think it's important to put this in very brief perspective, which is we are facing a migration challenge around the world of historic proportions. We've got more people on the move, displaced from their homes around the world than ever before, ever since we've been actually keeping the numbers on this. More than 100 million people in our own hemisphere. It's somewhere between 20 and 25 million people. And it used to be that we would have one crisis at a time. It might be Cuba, it might be Haiti. Now we've got Cuba, Haiti, Venezuela, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, Ecuador, Colombia, and so on down the list, Nicaragua. And then people coming to our hemisphere from outside the hemisphere trying to get into the United States. My piece of this, our piece of this at the State Department, is the work that we're doing with countries throughout our hemisphere for them to step up and take shared responsibility for this problem. And that means, among many other things, making sure that they themselves have asylum systems that work so that people will stay.
With all due respect, Secretary, we understand that. How are you going to assure us that you are going to stop the flow of illegal crossings at our southern border? Will you give us that assurance, and will you quantify it?
We are working comprehensively.
Without just talking about the problem, will you give us the assurance, and will you quantify it?
I would certainly defer to my colleagues at DHS and others who are working on the border itself. The piece that I'm focused on is working with other countries in the region.
Is it your opinion we should enforce third safe countries?
I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, my time's limited here. Should we enforce third safe country and remain in Mexico protocols?
We should work with other countries and enforce every reasonable measure to make sure that the migratory flow is safe, orderly, and humane. That's what we're working on.
Secretary Austin, we've had more than 25 attacks in the Middle East on our troops just since October 7th. Why are we not striking back more forcefully? Why are we not delivering a resounding message to stop those strikes on our bases and on our troops?
Thanks, Senator. As I said, the protection of our troops, the safety of our troops is very, very important to me and the President. And we maintain the right to respond at a place and time of our choosing. And we've said that, and we're serious about that.
So we're to understand that we will strike back sufficiently forcefully to stop these attacks.
We will do what's necessary to protect our troops and deter this kind of behavior.
One follow-up question. Senator Moran asked about a strategy with Ukraine that brings this war to a successful conclusion. What is that strategy?
Well, from our standpoint, we want to make sure that Ukraine, at the end of the day, is a democratic, independent, um, sovereign country that can defend its territory and deter aggression. We also want to make sure that that we keep NATO together, and I think the team has done a credible job in making sure that we bring our allies and partners along. Um, in terms of specific goals and objectives, I would defer to the Ukrainian leadership to define that. But again, our goal is to make sure that we're providing the support to Ukraine to do what it needs to defend its territory.
Thank you. We need to know that we have a strategy as part of this funding. I think it's very important in terms of building support for the funding for Ukraine. Thank you to you both. I appreciate it.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Vice Chair, for this hearing, and thank you to Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin for being here at this really critical time throughout the world. Senator Graham and Senator Moran, to some extent, both made the case for Hamas, for Iran funding Hamas and Iran's malign activities across the Middle East. But can you also talk about why funding Ukraine aid is important to degrade Iran's activities as well? So, Secretary Austin or Blinken?
Well, as you know, Senator, we've seen Iran provide munitions and drones to Russia, and Russia's used those capabilities to attack the Ukrainian infrastructure, attack civilians in towns and villages across the land. And so I think, making sure that we're dialing back some of the capability, they're connected, so I think it'll have an impact on what Iran is doing for Russia as well. So.
And Senator, I would only add that it's a two-way street. It's both the assistance that Iran is providing to Russia for use in Ukraine to further its aggression, but it's also increasingly technology that Russia is providing to Iran to make its own inventory more sophisticated that could and will almost certainly be used either against Israel or, for that matter, potentially against us, against our forces, against our personnel, either directly or via Iranian proxies that are in the region. So this relationship, this two-way relationship, is one of increasing concern to us, and one that we have to be acting against resolutely in both theaters, because they're closely linked.
I agree. I think it's very important for us to remind people that degrading Iran and their capabilities means not just supporting Israel, but it means supporting Ukraine as well. Last week, I chaired a hearing of the European Subcommittee on the Black Sea security. I think one of the things we've learned from this war in Ukraine is how important the Black Sea region is to so much of the world, and the fact that Ukraine actually, literally, Ukraine's grain exports literally feed the world. So can you speak to the interconnectedness between the world's food security and Russia's war against Ukraine, and why that's very important, and what's going to happen if we aren't able to continue to open up those grain corridors and provide the food that so many desperate nations and peoples need?
Senator, one of the many terrible consequences of Russia's aggression against Ukraine is the impact that it's had far and wide, well beyond Ukraine, well beyond Europe, on people around the world, no more so than when it comes to food security. We all know that Ukraine has been the, or certainly one of the breadbaskets of the world. Its export of wheat, of grain, of other food products is essential to people in Africa, many other continents, both in terms of the supply of food and also the price of food. And in interrupting, in stopping the export of foods and food products from Ukraine, particularly through the Black Sea, Russia's had a devastating impact on food security for people around the world. This never should have been necessary in the first place, the Black Sea Grain Initiative, because Russia never should have invaded Ukraine, and then once it did, it never should have blockaded Ukraine's ports and prevented it from exporting. But an arrangement was made, as you know very well, led by the United Nations and Turkey, to get an arrangement by which these products could be exported. And while that agreement was in force, while the Russians were respecting it, allowing it to go forward, some 30 million metric tons of wheat and grain were exported, the equivalent of 18 billion loaves of bread. So that's what was at stake. That's what's been now stopped by Russia refusing to allow that initiative to go forward. So we've been working with the Ukrainians, Europeans have been working with the Ukrainians to find other ways of getting these products out of Ukraine and to world markets, but nothing fully substitutes for the Black Sea. It's why you're so right to focus on it. And by the way, last thing I'll say is we have, as a result of a lot of good work that's been done and very good input from you and from others, a refined Black Sea strategy that we're also sharing with our allies and partners. I think this will be an important subject at the next NATO summit that we'll be hosting here in Washington.
Thank you. And I'm almost out of time, but I do want to ask you about the suggestion that's being floated that humanitarian aid is going to go through the UN, and the UN is going to take some funding off of that in ways that support the UN and don't support the end goal of that aid. So can you just point out why that is not correct?
First of all, that's just quite literally and practically not the way it works. The Security Council is not involved in these either the decisions about how the aid is used or distributed. It's individual UN agencies. Some of the critical UN agencies that are involved in providing assistance, like UNICEF, like the International Organization for Migration, like the World Food Program, happen to be led right now by Americans. In fact, 3 American women. And so we have great confidence in the ability of these agencies to do the critical work that they need to do, and to do it in a way that makes sure the assistance they're providing gets to the folks who need it, not folks who don't need it.
Thank you.
Senator Bozeman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here. And I'd like to talk a little bit about what I think is really the underpinning of our own defense security and our ability to provide aid to others, aid to our department, and that's our procurement ability. It's not glamorous, but it really is so very important. I've learned a lot about it through working with Senator Murray on our military construction efforts, but also Camden, Arkansas is a major player in that space, and they're working really hard. The people of Arkansas, the people of Camden have really stepped up. Secretary Austin, 2 years ago in the fiscal year 23 DOD budget hearing, I asked you about possible ways we could strengthen our industrial base to ensure we meet the current day demands and replenish our stockpiles. Since then, from your perspective, how has the industry responded? How is it performing? Are we making the right adjustments and doing so fast enough?
Well, thanks, Senator. I'll begin by saying that I'm committed to continuing to do the right things to make sure that we're working with industry to expand capacity where appropriate. We engaged in industry early on as this conflict in Ukraine started, and for the most part, well, in all cases, leaders of industry were very helpful, very willing to increase production, increase capacity, and so we have some good examples of that great work. In terms of whether or not it's fast enough, if you're me, it can never be fast enough. If you're Ukrainian, you can never get it there fast enough. But there are some limitations in terms of how quickly they can do certain things. There will continue to be workforce challenges. And when you expand capacity, there's this issue of the time that it takes to build the capacity and then make sure that the lines are running smoothly. Now, what they've done in a lot of cases to meet urgent needs is double and triple shifts so that they can, in some cases, crank out munitions and weapons at a much greater speed. So the cooperation that we have enjoyed throughout, I think, has been really good. And we are in contact with industry leadership nearly daily. And my under for acquisition and sustainment is engaging on a daily basis, and I meet with them frequently. So they are doing the right things. They are being very, very helpful, but it can never move fast enough, to answer your question.
So with all the global demand now, and then the possibilities of looking into the future, with such an uncertain world, we have this global demand for short-range rocket motors, PAC-3 missiles, HIMARS, Javelins, Stingers, 155 military artillery rounds. Do you feel that the request replenishes current stockpiles to an appropriate level while simultaneously fulfilling current day demands? Do you feel industry is able to meet the higher request if needed?
I do. I think what we have in this request is the right amount, and I would say that we're going after capability as fast as industry can produce it, and so we've asked you for $3 billion as a part of this request to invest in helping to expand that capacity with industry, but it's a thing that we need to continue to work.
So regarding the Israel portion of the supplemental related to the Iron Dome request, the language is structured as a transfer to Israel. I'm hearing from industry that they are currently lacking the investment to help quickly accelerate rocket motor production for the interceptor missile to meet the new increased demand. The Ukraine portion of the request includes language allowing appropriated dollars to support infrastructure investments to accelerate production. Should we include similar language to support infrastructure investments to help meet the interceptor missile demands?
Senator, as a general rule, we're going to do everything that we can to meet the demands that we see in both Ukraine and Israel. As you know, this is the munition that you're addressing is a co-produced munition,
Right.
And so the American company that produces that munition is a company that I wants to work for. So I'll have to take that question for the record rather than answer.
I don't have time to address the question, but as ranking member on agriculture, I'm concerned about Russia using food as a weapon. So that's for what it's worth.
Very much share that concern.
Senator Merkley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome to both of you. Secretary Blinken, in your testimony, you talked about the worsening humanitarian catastrophe and how the humanitarian challenges are relevant to our deeply held principles that every civilian life is equally worthy of protection, and that a failure on humanitarian relief could make conflict more likely to spread. I was heartened to hear that Israel has agreed to facilitate getting 100 trucks a day of aid in, but senior UN and humanitarian agencies, senior personnel both, have said that Rafah crossing is not equipped for that type of logistical operation, and that the place where the 500 trucks before came was primarily through Karim Shalom, which is also on the border with Egypt, but it's set up to facilitate large amounts of trucks getting through. Are we pushing to really for Israel to solve the logistic problems so we can actually get, and 100 trucks really it's 1/5 of what was supplying Gaza before, so that's really just the ultimate minimum, but much more is needed. Are we pushing to have Israel solve those logistical problems quickly to get that humanitarian relief in?
Thank you, Senator. We're looking at every means possible to get assistance into Gaza. I think one of the challenges we have is, while we fully agree that even 100 trucks, and we're still not there, and we want to get there as quickly as possible, is not going to fully meet the needs. There's also an absorptive capacity problem on the Gaza side, given the conflict, given the horrific disruptions that we're seeing. So even if you could get trucks well above 100 going in, you need to have on the receiving end, the capacity to actually both take and distribute that assistance. That's also lacking. So we've got to work on that too.
Right, that too. But are we pushing I'm just looking for yes or no to use the additional logistical capacity that is at Karim Shalom?
Right now, our focus is on maximizing what we can do through Rafah. But even as we're doing that, we'll look at other ways to get assistance in.
Thank you. I'm very concerned on the testimony of other experts that that's going to be very hard, and the moment is like right now, hunger rising, thirst rising, the potential for disease and conversations with the Red Cross and others huge because of the contaminated water, possibility of cholera, et cetera. I want to turn to an article by Thomas Friedman on October 19th. He said, if Israel rushes headlong into Gaza to destroy Hamas and does so without expressing a commitment to seek a two-state solution with the Palestinian Authority and end Jewish settlements deep in the West Bank, will be marking a grave mistake that will be devastating for Israeli interests and for American interests. And he notes that the impacts include fanning the flames on the West Bank, a risk of a broader war with Hezbollah and Lebanon, eliminating the possibility of any coalition governing Gaza after all this passes, including whether it's Palestinian, Arab League, UN, NATO, so forth, and destroying the probability of normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. That's quite a set of American interests. Do you share Thomas Friedman's concern that without a vision of a two-state solution to address the prosperity and thriving and Palestinian aspirations, that we're locked into hostilities that will haunt us forever?
It's been the policy of this administration from day one to support and try to put in place the conditions to actually get to a two-state solution. We believe that is the only way to truly ensure Israel's security as a Jewish and democratic state and to give Palestinians the state to which they're entitled. So we believe that that's essential. At the same time, we've been working very hard to both deepen and expand the process of normalization between Israel and its neighbors, both far and wide. And these things
Thank you. I want to slip in one more question. I support the two-state solution, but I think
Go ahead.
The facts on the ground are making it more and more difficult, and I agree with Friedman's analysis that policy has to change around settlements in order for that to be a possibility. I want to close with a question related to getting the Americans out, the families who are there. I have an Oregon family. They relayed to me how they'd 3 times gotten a text message, email saying, drop everything, go to the Rafah crossing. They waited until dark each time. Nothing happened. They weren't interfered with by Hamas, just the gate never opened. NBC has reported on another family in Massachusetts, the Medway family, very, very almost parallel experience. Why can't, with the trucks coming in, why can't at the same time we get those families, those American families who are lined up at the gate, having received notices from the United States to do so, why can't we get them out that gate?
Senator, as I mentioned earlier, this is something we're working on every single day. We want to get our fellow citizens out, and we're trying to find the way to do that. To date, the impediment has been Hamas, and I regret very much that we've had occasions where we thought that we would be able to move forward, which is one of the reasons we were in contact with people and suggested that they get in place to do that, only to find that the necessary procedures that had to be put in place to actually make that work couldn't go forward, and Hamas has been the impediment to that. We continue to work on it. We're working on it with Egypt. We're working on it with Israel. We're looking for ways to get people out. But because Hamas controls what goes on, for the most part, inside of Gaza, unless it agrees, then it's going to be very difficult to get that done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Moore Capito.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here today. I think this is a very important hearing. I want to thank the chair and vice chair for the hearing. I remain an adamant supporter of our allies in Israel and believe that we should continue to back Ukraine against Russian aggression. You both made that point very clear. But I do believe that you've also made clear the point and emphasized how intertwined Ukraine and Israel are important to our own national security. But in your own statement, Secretary Blinken, in your statement, you mentioned one little throwaway line here when you say that includes addressing the hemispheric challenge of irregular migration. I am assuming you're talking about our southern border here. As been reiterated, 269,000 last month, over 200 on the terror watch list. Americans are right to be extremely concerned about what's happening here and how it's intertwined with everything that's happening globally. And we can't lose sight of what we see. I am sure you, particularly Secretary Blinken, when you see the news of the anti-Semitic rallies that are occurring in our own country and across the globe, it's something I didn't think we would ever see in our lifetime. And it's earth-shattering. So will you please make a better case of why our own homeland security here, including our southern border, is figuring into the equations that you've brought us here today to talk about?
Thank you very much, Senator, and I appreciate as well your reference to the, as you said, almost unimaginable instances of anti-Semitism that we've seen, as well, by the way, as expressions of Islamophobia and other bigotry that unfortunately horrifically surfaces, particularly in times like these. With regard to migration, as I mentioned earlier, we have a genuinely historic challenge. We have a historic challenge in our own hemisphere with nearly 25 million people on the move. What we're working to do from the perspective of the State Department is to work closely with other countries to get them to assume their share of responsibility in dealing with this migration. And that means, and
with
it's
all
in the
due
budget.
respect, it's not working.
This
It's
is
not working.
This is, as I said, a problem of truly historic proportions, requires a comprehensive effort that we're making. It also requires a lot of things, including comprehensive immigration reform. The very first piece of legislation the president put before Congress would have done that. Unfortunately, it hasn't been addressed.
Here's
in
what
the
I'm
last 3 years.
concerned about, and I think a lot when you see the 200 from the terrorist list. I know we're all concerned about this, that seeds of foment of terrorism could grow in all of, as you see this sort of seeds of unrest in our own country, as we're watching Ukraine and we're watching Israel. We don't want to take the eye off the ball of what's actually happening here, and I'm sure that nobody here wants to see that. I am concerned. I would like to go to another question for Secretary Austin. Much like my fellow senator from Arkansas, we do manufacture a lot of the munitions at Allegheny Ballistics Laboratory in West Virginia, where we have over 1,600 people working there. And this supplemental does help build up that industrial base and industrial production at that facility and other facilities across the country. I guess when we see where we are now, would you say that we've learned a lot about our munition requirements because of what's happened in Ukraine? Or would you say that these were issues that had been, I guess, focused on at the Department of Defense, but we hadn't really realized where we were until we have to replenish everything that we've given away or sold, and to be able to get our own capacity up to where we want it to be?
Okay, thanks, Senator. I want to be clear about the fact that we have maintained and will continue to maintain adequate capability to protect our interests and defend this country. And so as we have drawn down some of our stocks to provide capability to others, it's important to replenish that so that we continue to maintain agility and depth so that we can respond to crisis like we've seen. But our ability to protect ourselves and protect our interests, we will never mortgage that. And we go through a process every week as we receive requests for assistance, and we measure what's being requested against what's required for our defense, and we make the right calls. And in Ukraine's case, there are some 50 countries, as you know, that are working with us to provide security assistance. Israel, their fight's a different fight, and their requirements are a bit different, and so, you know, they're using different types of things. So we're able to meet both requirements, and so again, there is an urgent need to get the supplemental so that we can continue to do the things that you mentioned in terms of replenishing those stocks that give us that flexibility going forward.
Thank you.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Vice Chair Collins, and I'll thank the chair in your absence and our two important witnesses today. Thank you for your timely and critical leadership in this hinge point in our role in the world and in human history. It is critical that we meet this moment and provide the full supplemental request presented to Congress by our president. We have to sustain U.S. global leadership, and I would argue it is directly in our national security interests for us to stand up to tyrants and terrorists while meeting humanitarian needs to help stabilize critically impacted communities. The conflicts in Israel and in Ukraine are regional in nature, but they have global consequences. As the world questions whether the United States is a reliable, trustworthy ally, we have to fund our sustained presence in these fights. We have to see the global impact of a conflict like Ukraine that is having on global food security. We have to recognize we can't just respond to Russian aggression in Europe while Russian proxies are spreading instability around the world in places like Africa. And addressing just the humanitarian needs in the Middle East by cutting responses in this hemisphere is not in our interests. We have to address these challenges comprehensively. Secretary Blinken, if I could, I just briefly want to ask you, humanitarian relief has long been bipartisan. There are some who are questioning whether we are spending too much, whether we are preventing diversion to terrorists. You've addressed that previously. I've been reassured to hear directly from Israeli representatives. They value humanitarian relief in the middle of this conflict. You're only asking for us to sustain our current year funding going forward, and it will provide humanitarian relief across dozens of countries around the world that are facing threats of instability. Could you speak to the strategic value of our continued humanitarian relief leadership?
Thank you very much, Senator, and I appreciate the fact you've underscored that what we're looking at is to sustain what we've already been doing, and also making the point that, yes, this would be vital for Ukraine. It would be vital for people in Gaza, but also this would cover situations that we have to address in Sudan, in Afghanistan, Nagorno-Karabakh, and other places. And I think, again, there are two things that are at stake here. One is, and I always lead with this because I think this really is who we are, is the imperative that America continue to be seen as the country that stands with those who desperately need assistance at the most critical time. And this goes to, I think, an impulse that most Americans feel to help. But it's also a critical strategic proposition. I'll give you one example. It's imperative that Hamas be defeated. And it's imperative that Hamas no longer pose the threat that it's posed so acutely to Israel. But there's military defeat. There's also ideological defeat. You can't kill an idea, no matter how perverted and distorted it is. You have to be able to offer a better alternative to people who are in desperate straits. Our ability, our willingness to be leading the effort to help them deal with the acute challenges they face in their lives, as well as offering a genuine vision for how life can be better, is a vital strategic interest of ours.
Another key piece of this support package, if I might, Mr. Secretary, is the non-lethal support to Ukraine.
That's right.
We are providing a significant amount, although our European partners are providing dramatically more. We're not just sending weapons, we're sustaining Ukraine's ability to have a robust economy and government. How critical to Ukraine's sustained war effort and to Ukraine's independence is this ongoing non-lethal budget support? I'd be interested in hearing a brief response from both witnesses.
It's essential. It is essential to Ukraine's success, and here's why. Russia's doing two things. It's trying to go at Ukraine on the battlefield, and as you've heard the Secretary say, Ukraine's had remarkable success, again, thanks to so much support from Congress over the last year and a half in getting back 50% of the territory seized from it. And of course, there's an ongoing intense battle now in the east and the south. But Russia's also going at what it sees as the soft underbelly of Ukraine, and that is its electric grids, its ability to produce and export food, its basic infrastructure. This is another way by which basically Putin hopes to sap the will and defeat Ukraine. The assistance that we're providing to make sure that it can secure and provide energy for its own people, that it can sustain its agricultural system, that it can sustain its economy and grow its economy to the point where it's got a rising tax base, it can pay increasingly for its own defense and deterrence. Those are absolutely essential to making sure that it succeeds in this war effort.
I'll summarize, if I might. Secretary, if we only send weapons to Ukraine, but we fail to support their government and their economy, they will lose to Putin's aggression nonetheless. Is that correct, Mr.
I
Secretary?
absolutely agree, Senator.
Closing quick point, there's $2 billion in this request for support for the Treasury Department to work with the IMF and the World Bank. It would unlock $50 billion in support. I hope my colleagues will look closely at the ways that that would allow us to support critical allies like Egypt and Jordan, as well as other countries around the region and world that are facing instability because of the war in Ukraine. Thank you, and thank you for the chance to be with you.
Senator Kennedy.
Secretary Austin, is it not true that the world is on fire in Ukraine, the world is on fire in the Middle East, and that there are embers smoldering in the Indo-Pacific?
I would say that clearly there are challenges in both the places that you mentioned. And of course, in the Indo-Pacific, we see a China that's increasingly aggressive.
Do you disagree with my statement?
That the world is on fire? I would describe it a bit differently. I agree with your premise that it's as challenging as we've seen.
Is it not true? Sorry to cut you off, but we only have limited time. Is it not true that China, Russia, and Iran have worked between and among themselves to either start those fires, encourage those fires, or create those embers?
I would say that we see evidence of them growing closer together since the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I would not. I didn't see evidence of China collaborating with Russia to cause them to launch their invasion on its neighbor.
Is it not true that China, Russia, and Iran would like to see Russia dominate Central and Eastern Europe?
I think China would like to see the United States be unsuccessful. They would like to see Russia continue to challenge us and keep us, focused on that area, so that we'd have less time and energy and resources to focus.
Well,
on our
the
basic
situation I just described, I appreciate you parsing your words, but the situation I just described would not disappoint China, Russia, or Iran, would it?
I'm certain that it wouldn't.
Okay. Is it not true that China, Russia, and Iran would like to see Iran dominate the Middle East?
I certainly believe that Iran would like to see Iran dominate the Middle
Well,
East.
do you
but,
think that would break China's heart or Russia's heart to see Iran dominate the Middle East?
I don't think Russia or China would be unhappy about that, but
Is it not true that China, Iran, and Russia would like to see China dominate the Indo-Pacific and be free to make moves in sub-Saharan Africa and South America? Is that not true?
I think that is certainly China's goal, to be the dominant player in the Indo-Pacific.
And that is not a world safe for democracy, is it?
It is not. It's one that would be controlled by autocrats eventually if they were to dominate the Indo-Pacific, and if Iran dominated activities in the
And
Middle
if
East.
we did not stop them, strike that. Do you believe that weakness invites the wolves?
I do. I think deterrence. In order to deter, you have to show strength.
And if we do not meet these challenges now, Do you believe it will be more expensive in terms of America blood and treasure to meet them later?
I do. I do, Senator.
All right, I've got one last question. Mr. Secretary, I'm looking at your and the President's proposed supplemental. What does $16 billion for child care, $6.5 billion for the Federal Communications Commission to extend high-speed internet, and $3.1 billion for the FCC to reimburse telecommunication companies to replace insecure equipment have to do with the world challenges we're facing right now? And why did you make this request?
I would defer to other colleagues on those specific aspects of the
Do you
budget
support
request.
those?
I support the supplemental budget request.
Okay. Last question. Mr. Secretary, I appreciate your candid answers, but why did the Department of Defense oppose my bill calling for a special inspector general in Ukraine so we could follow every penny of American taxpayer money, given the fact that the Inspector General of the Department of Defense has never been able to audit his own department?
The Inspector General of DOD has been involved in this effort from the very beginning.
Oh, I know. Believe me, he opposed my bill, and I find that ironic because the Department of Defense is the only federal agency that has never, in the history of ever, been audited. But your Inspector General insisted that he be in charge. Do you not see the irony there with respect to Ukraine?
Senator, I'm confident our Inspector General will do a great job in making sure that we remain on track with our responsibilities in Ukraine, and Europe.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Chair and Vice Chair. Thank you, Secretaries, for being here. I don't think there's anyone on this dais who would disagree that we are in a fight against global fascism and that what happened in Israel is Israel's 9/11. It causes anguish, it causes outrage, and hopefully we can achieve some collective moral clarity about moving forward. But Secretary Austin, I want to ask you about the post 9/11 period in the United States. It seems to me that that collective anguish and outrage and moral clarity converted itself into some bad strategic decisions that we are still dealing with in the region. And so my question for you is, what kind of strategic advice are you giving to your Israeli counterparts about avoiding the mistakes that we made in the past?
Thanks, Senator. Great question, and I have had those conversations with my counterpart. And my advice to him was to be thoughtful about actions and objectives and what they were trying to accomplish, and really think that through, because if you don't, then the consequences can be long lasting. And so we shared that with them on a number of occasions, and hopefully that has made a difference.
Do you think Israel has completed its strategic deliberations about what comes next?
I don't know for sure, Senator Schatz, if they have. Because I'm not privy to their internal cabinet discussions. But I certainly would say that from the very beginning, I have encouraged them to think about, what this looks like at the end of the day, what this transitions to, and really to begin to think through many of the things that Secretary Blinken mentioned earlier, because I think that's really important. If you don't do things to address the underlying causes of instability, then you create a bigger problem, or you have a lasting problem that will just go on forever and ever.
Secretary Blinken, let's do a thought experiment. Hamas, at some point in the future, is disabled. I think eliminating is it's a rhetorical flourish that puts us in a position where we will never stop fighting against some offshoot, some first cousin of Hamas, some place on the planet. So let's stipulate that the objective is to disable them to the point where they cannot pose a threat. Who runs Gaza?
Well, I think we have two shoals, if you will. One is we can't have a reversion of the status quo with Hamas running Gaza. We also can't have, and the Israelis start with this proposition themselves, Israel running or controlling Gaza. That's not their intent. It's what they want to do, and it's not something that would be supported. So in between those shoals are a variety of possible permutations that we're looking at very closely now, as are other countries. At some point, let me be more precise.
Sure.
At some point, what would make the most sense would be for a effective and revitalized Palestinian Authority to have governance and ultimately security responsibility for Gaza. Whether you can get there in one step is a big question that we have to look at. And if you can't, then there are other temporary arrangements that may involve a number of other countries in the region. It may involve international agencies that would help provide for both security and governance. Ultimately, though, beyond that is what we come back to, what this administration believes, which is the imperative of getting to two states for two peoples. That's where you finally get the kind of sustained security that a Jewish and democratic state of Israel needs and must have, and you also get the state that the Palestinians are entitled to.
I think you're both being very thoughtful about this. I want to say that. But I think the worry that I have, and I've heard it bouncing around the halls of the Capitol, is that when we ask about what the end state is, what I've heard is, well, we didn't ask what the end state was in World War II. We just went ahead and fought the bad guys and let us sort it out later. I'm not sure that's satisfactory in this instance. And I think the question of what the end state is ought to be wrestled with at least simultaneously and in an ideal situation precede the military strategy, because what are we even fighting towards if we don't know what the political objective is?
Senator, I think you're absolutely right. And just to reassure you somewhat, we are very much grappling with that. This is a very active, ongoing deliberation both within the government as well as with allies and partners, including in the region. And everyone is focused on not only what's happening right now in Gaza, but exactly as you say, where this lands, where this goes, and in a way that fundamentally and materially changes two things. Changes the security for Israel and changes the situation for Palestinians who have been living under, well before October 7th, a Hamas regime that is in so many ways destroying their lives, misogynistic, repressive, and instead of spending the resources that it was getting to better the lives of Palestinians, spending them instead on building tunnels and building rockets so that it could attack Israel. We need to see a fundamental change in the circumstance of Palestinians living in Gaza, and we need to see a fundamental change, I think, in the circumstance for Palestinians that gets to a state of their own.
Thank you.
Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you both for being here. We know how critical that this hearing has been, and I certainly appreciate your contributions. Iran has a long and well-documented history of being the primary funder of Hamas. Iran has supplied Hamas with the funds, arms, missiles, drones, and other equipment, as well as training and technical expertise. I find it extremely hard to believe that Hamas would have carried out its brutal attack on Israel without Iran's knowledge. Secretary Austin, in the immediate aftermath of Hamas's attack, the administration claimed it did not have evidence that Iran was involved. Is this still this administration's position?
It is from the standpoint of we didn't see direct involvement in the planning or the decision to execute this on a part of Iran. Having said that, the point that you made earlier, Senator, that they have funded, resourced, enabled, trained Hamas operatives means that they have a big part in this. So, but in terms of their actual participation in the planning and the decision to conduct this attack, we didn't see evidence of that.
Do you think they are the puppet master?
I think they are. They certainly control a number of entities throughout the region. Shia militia, Lebanese Hezbollah, and so that's what they do. They export mischief and use other people's resources to carry that out.
And Iran continues to illegally sell more than 150 million in petroleum and petroleum products each day, primarily to China. Iran uses these funds to support Hamas, Hezbollah, and other bad actors while oppressing the Iranian people. What more does this administration plan to do to curtail these sales? And I'll direct that to you, Mr. Blinken.
Thank you very much, Senator. First, it's important to note that over the course of this administration, we have sanctioned more than 400 Iranian individuals or entities for things like supporting Hamas. And that's something that continues to this very moment. We're very aggressively engaged in cracking down on financing and support for Hamas, wherever it's coming from, and including and notably Iran. We've also taken action against the so-called ghost shipping of oil and trying to cut off the proceeds from that, and going against different entities that are engaged in that kind of trafficking. And we have a very vigorous effort underway to make sure that wherever we can, we're cutting off Iran from getting illegal proceeds that then turn around and go to finance terror or go to finance its own activities.
And continuing with you, following the Hamas attack, the administration stated that it froze the $6 billion in funds that were cleared for release to Iran in order to secure the release of Americans held hostage by Iran. Is this freeze permanent, and what mechanism is the United States using to freeze these funds?
So let's be very clear about this, because it's important. I'm afraid that some people have been misinformed, and others may be misinforming about the $6 billion. These are funds that accrued from the sale of Iranian oil over many years to an account in South Korea that was established by the previous administration. The proceeds were to be used under our laws and under our sanctions for humanitarian purposes. Those have never been prohibited by our sanctions against Iran. And indeed, the previous administration set up a mechanism to enable any oil proceeds that Iran was getting to be channeled to accounts where they could be controlled and only used for humanitarian purposes. The money in that South Korean account that accrued from the sale of these proceeds, for technical reasons related to Korean banks, was unable to be used, even though it lawfully could be. So it was moved to an account in Qatar where it could be used for humanitarian purposes, just as the previous administration established another account in another country for these very purposes. The money never goes and would never go to Iran. It can only be used for authorized transactions overseen by our Treasury Department, and only for things like food, medicine, and other authorized humanitarian purposes. To date, not a single dollar has been expended from that account. There are currently no plans to expend a single dollar from that account, and in any event, that money never touches Iran directly.
Thank you. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin, for your service always, but especially at this moment. You've both commented through your opening statements and through questions about the interconnectedness of the elements of this supplemental package. Support for Israel in its fight against Hamas, support for Ukraine in its efforts to repel Putin's invasion, support for humanitarian aid for displaced civilians and those caught in the crossfire, a focus on our manufacturing sector and its workforce needs to ramp up production, among many other elements that this package has. You've also both answered questions about the urgency of congressional action, especially given the fact that House Republicans dropped funding for Ukraine from the current continuing resolution that is keeping government running here in the United States. So against this backdrop, I was really taken aback to see calls in the House for dismantling this package and taking it up perhaps only one or two elements of the package. So in terms of urgency, President Zelensky told us, as Senator Durbin mentioned, when we met with him back in September, that without our help, Putin will prevail. And then again, that was followed by a pause in assistance during the current CR. So I just want to ask you, Secretary Austin, to tell this panel in no uncertain terms how urgent it is for us to pass this package in its entirety with respect to keeping Ukraine in this fight.
Thanks, Senator. I think it's absolutely urgent. As you may have heard me say at the very top, they are in a fight. This is not a notional thing. They're fighting to protect their sovereign territory. They're fighting for their existence. And our help has enabled them to do what they've done to date, and they've made credible progress. They have impressed the world with their bravery, with their professionalism, with their determination, and so their goal is to take back as much of their sovereign territory as possible. And I think we need to provide them the ability to continue to do that, and we need to do that urgently.
Thank you. Secretary Blinken, I participated in the same briefing that Senator Merkley referenced earlier with the UN Relief and Works Agency, getting an update on the humanitarian situation in Gaza for those displaced and literally in the crossfire. Among the things we were hearing were just an assessment of what's happening in the hospital, the lack of medical supplies, anesthesia, things like that, and the dwindling, if any, remains in sort of food stocks and storage. You've talked about our efforts to support increasing the number of supply trucks that are able to get in. But again, your own reflections that prior to October 7th and the terrorist attack on Israel, there were 500 to 800 trucks going in a day, and now we're at 50 to 60. How will this humanitarian aid package assist in our leadership in increasing that, and how urgent is it that we pass that part of the entire package?
Thank you very much, Senator. Look, from my perspective and our perspective, it's beyond urgent, precisely for the reasons that you cite. And we are trying to ramp up now to 100 trucks, and my hope is that will happen this week. And as you pointed out, as I pointed out earlier, that's still well less than what was happening before October 7th. But as I also mentioned, on the Gaza side, even if we could get 500 or 600 trucks, we've got an absorptive capacity challenge in terms of the ability of folks on the ground in Gaza to actually receive the assistance, to distribute it, to use it effectively. So that also needs to be ramped up in the middle of a conflict. We're working on both ends to make that happen.
Mr. Secretary,
But-
I don't want to interrupt you, but I've been informed that you need to leave at 12:30. We have several senators here who have not had an opportunity to speak. I want to make sure we keep everybody's time to 5 minutes so they have that opportunity.
In any event, yes, it is very urgent. Thank you.
Senator Haggerty.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome both secretaries. Secretary Blinken, I'd like to start with you. I sent a letter last week to both yourself and to Administrator Powell asking for specific details on the funding that's gone into Gaza, the foreign assistance funding, U.S. taxpayer dollar foreign assistance funding that's gone into Gaza, the recipients and the sub-recipients of that funding. Are you in a position to give me complete answers today to that?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, we've got the letter. We're working on it. You asked important and very detailed questions. We need some time to make sure that we're giving you the most robust and accurate answers possible. So, in short, we will get that back to you.
At a high level, can you tell me the amount of funding overall under your watch that's gone into Gaza?
So overall, we provided about $1 billion in assistance to the Palestinians through the UN Works and Relief Agency.
That's a significant amount of money. I look forward to going through the detailed response from you provided, and I appreciate that commitment to do so in a timely fashion. I'd like to tell you why I am asking this. I want to make certain that you can guarantee that not one dime of U.S. taxpayer funding is going to, the funding that's going to Gaza is going to benefit Hamas and their terrorist activities. Yeah. Has that happened? And I think the question I'd like to ask is, can you guarantee us that no taxpayer money, no U.S. taxpayer money, went to fund the attack that Hamas delivered in Israel on October the 7th?
So we have, and we've had from day one, and we'll obviously get back to you in response to this letter, a robust monitoring, inspection, verification system for the assistance that goes to any international organization, and including.
Can you guarantee, though, that U.S. taxpayer dollars didn't go to Hamas to help fund this attack on October the 7th?
So everything that we're doing in terms of making sure that the assistance is used for purposes for which it's designated, not for other purposes. As I said, we have a robust system in place.
Can I share my concern, Mr. Secretary, to be more specific about this? In May of 2021, I traveled to Israel after the 11-day war. I met with Prime Minister Netanyahu with his national security advisor. They briefed me and my team on the fact that every humanitarian aid dollar, every foreign aid dollar that goes into Gaza is controlled by Hamas. They either direct it, they tax it, or they divert it. They even take pipes intended for the water system for civilians and turn those into rockets that are aimed at Israel. We've seen Hamas's own videos demonstrating this. So I'm going to come back and ask you, can you guarantee that U.S. taxpayer dollars weren't used in October 7th attack?
What I can guarantee is that we take every possible precaution to ensure that these resources are not diverted. Second,
let me come at it another way then, Mr. Secretary, because your own State Department has made an internal assessment on this. Madam Chair, I'd like to submit for the record a set of internal State Department emails from 2021 that were obtained via FOIA. And
Without
Secretary
objection.
Blinken, I'd like to specifically read from part of that. The assessment of your own State Department in 2021 is that, quote, due to Hamas's overall strength and level of control over Gaza, there is a high risk that Hamas could potentially derive indirect, unintentional benefit from U.S. assistance to Gaza. Secretary Blinken, do you agree with this assessment?
I do. And here's the challenge that we face, Senator. We have in Gaza somewhere over 2 million people, the overwhelming majority of which, virtually everyone, not a member of Hamas, and indeed increasingly disgusted.
I understand, but I'm talking about Hamas's control over the funds, not the citizenship there. And with respect to their control of the funds, can you guarantee that the U.S. isn't funding both sides of this war, Mr. Secretary?
It is important that the one agency that has the ability to operate either directly or through agencies that it works with, and that we have robust controls in place to ensure that the money.
Let me come back to this because I need to reclaim my time. I'm losing it. Israel has said that Hamas is diverting foreign aid. Hamas has even demonstrated that with their own videos. Your own department has warned about the high risk. And I've yet to see, but I hope to, that where the actual funds flow is coming to Hamas from our government to Gaza. But I'm deeply concerned here, and we need to be convinced that we're not funding both sides of this war, that U.S. taxpayers aren't put in a position of funding a vicious cycle. And I think this department, I think your department needs to confirm that with this committee. We need that level of detail so that as we appropriate a massive request for funding, we can assess the risk ourselves, Mr. Secretary.
And Senator, we'll work with you on that, and we'll get you the information. I want to respond as robustly as we can to your letter. I also want to make sure that we are doing everything we possibly can for the 1 million children in Gaza who desperately need.
I hear you. I just
food,
don't want to see the U.S.
medicine,
taxpayer
support.
funding both sides of this war
Mr.
in Israel with
Secretary,
Hamas.
and I hate to interrupt, and I know you will respond to that, but we want to make sure we get to all the senators that are here. Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Blinken, Secretary Austin, we know you've been working around the clock to protect our friends in Israel and Ukraine. Thank you for your work. Thanks for being here. Secretary Blinken, I want to thank you. At the outset, you described in really horrific detail what happened on October 7th. I think it's important that we be absolutely clear the nature of this brutal terrorist attack. And I share with you the real worry that in this country and around the world, the memory of October 7th, just a few weeks in our rearview mirror, has disappeared. It's incredibly important for us to remind the world about how our nation was changed after September 11th and how Israel has been changed as well by this and how we have an obligation to stand up for them. Secretary Austin, I wanted to talk to you, as Senator Schatz did, about the lessons that we've learned in our counterterrorism operations. I note a story from this weekend in the Washington Post entitled U.S. Urges Israel Against Gaza Ground Invasion Pushes Surgical Campaign. And I don't want to ask you about the confidential communications you've had with your Israeli counterparts, but one of the lessons that we've learned in our counterterrorism operations is that not done well, you can end up creating more terrorists than you kill. In particular, when you are careless about civilian casualties, those civilian casualties become terrorist fuel. They become bulletin board recruiting material for terrorist groups. And so there's a moral imperative to reduce civilian casualties, but there is also a strategic imperative. And so I want to ask you whether you have a worry that the nature of the Israeli ground operation and the number of civilians that have been killed and will be killed could end up strengthening Hamas or other affiliated anti-Israel terrorist groups in the long run.
I agree with everything that you said, Senator, and that is a key lesson that we learned in our in the fights that we fought over the last 20 years or so. The things that you do on the battlefield could, if you're not thoughtful about them, they could create a resistance to your effort that lasts for generations. And so there is an operational and strategic imperative to make sure that we're doing the right things as we outline our objectives and prescribe our techniques about how we're going to go about this. So we've had those conversations for exactly the right the reasons that you mentioned.
Secretary Austin, turning to Ukraine, I think the reason why many of us are so worried about splitting Ukraine aid and Israel aid is because there is an urgency, a real urgency in Ukraine right now. And we know that this place has trouble doing one difficult thing, never mind splitting it into two or three. I know that we're careful about talking about the urgency because we don't want to cause panic or damage morale in Ukraine. But I do think we have to be honest with the American people and with this Senate about the consequences of not funding Ukraine. Admiral Rob Bauer of the Netherlands, who you know well, said that the bottom of the barrel is now visible. And so I just want to ask you a pointed question about ammunition. We are really getting to a point very soon where there are not bullets in the guns. And we need to be serious with our colleagues about the consequences for the rank and file soldiers in Ukraine if we don't get this assistance soon. The need is dire, isn't it?
It absolutely is, Senator. And again, this funds artillery munitions, small arm munitions, you name it, and they desperately need a constant supply of warfighting capability in order to be successful. We would like to see them continue their operations through the winter. I think that's an imperative. They can't do that if we've caused them to pause because there's a pause in the security assistance that we provide.
30 seconds, Secretary Blinken, fuel into Gaza. Do we have a process to deliver fuel into Gaza that assures that it doesn't get diverted to Hamas?
We're working urgently on that. I'll say two things very quickly about it. First, Hamas has its own stockpile of fuel. If it cared a whit about the people of Gaza, it would make sure itself that it used that fuel to have the hospitals be able to operate, have the incubators stay turned on, et cetera. But of course it doesn't. And we have an obligation to do everything we can, if Hamas is not going to do it, to look out for people in Gaza. So we are working on a mechanism that can get fuel to where it's needed, particularly
Mr.
hospitals,
Secretary,
bakeries,
Mr.
desalination plants.
Secretary,
so
I'm
that
going to have to
people can-
interrupt you because, again,
Yep,
you
thank you.
have informed us you need to leave, and I want to make sure as many senators as possible have time. Senator Britt.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairman. I'd like to start by telling you and the Vice Chair how much we appreciate you holding this hearing. It is critically important that we have the opportunity to ask tough questions, to get answers for the American people, and to do our job. You allowing us to be here today will certainly make great strides towards that. Thank you both for being here before this committee. Before we start in on talking about some of the topics that we're here to talk about today, I want to make sure that we make a point on our border. So the National Defense Strategy of our nation promises that first we will defend our homeland. In order to do that, we must secure our border. When we are talking about the number of people here and the number of countries, Secretary Blinken, I'd like to add to the countries that you just said. We have people from Iran, people from Syria, people from Yemen, people from Jordan, people from Lebanon. We know the foothold that Iran has in so many of these nations. Now, these are the people that we have encountered at the border. There exists a problem that we have 1.7 million gotaways into this nation where we don't know who they are, where they're going, or what their intentions are. As we see anti-Semitic behavior rise not only across the oceans, but here in this nation, we must do every single thing that we can to keep our homeland safe, and that starts with securing our border. When we look at what's happening in Israel and the atrocities, I want to thank both of you for going and putting boots on the ground immediately, telling our friends and greatest ally in the Middle East, Israel, that we stand shoulder to shoulder with them, particularly in the face of these barbaric atrocities that occurred on October 7th. Secretary Blinken, thank you for what you just said, talking about what actually happened. I hope that every media outlet plays what you testified to earlier, and that is that we have seen men with their eyeballs gouged out. We saw children watch their parents be executed. We saw families at their breakfast table be tortured and murdered. This must stop. And in order for people in Israel to be able to tuck their children in at night, and people across this globe, we must eradicate Hamas. In doing so, we've got to take the threat of Iran seriously and what they've been doing across the globe, what they've been funding, who they have been training. You said earlier, Secretary Blinken, you agreed with Senator Graham that the normalization efforts with Saudi and Israel, that was one of the links in the chain that led us to where we are today. My question for you is, do you agree that the strategy of what I would call appeasement from this administration that occurred starting with the Obama administration now to here when it's easing off of sanctions, even offering to enter back into talks about the JCPOA, that type of behavior also contributed to where we are today?
Oops. Thank you, Senator. It won't surprise you that I wouldn't agree with that statement, even though I agree with pretty much everything you said right up to that statement. And again, I just point out that when it comes to Iran, two things very quickly. One.
And go ahead. And I know I have a limited time.
Very quickly. We've been engaged in going at Iran for its support in a whole variety of ways for malicious activities throughout the region, including support for terrorism, including destabilization. That's involved, as I said, sanctioning more than 400 Iranian entities and individuals over the last 2.5 years.
And not to cut you off, but I know that she's going to cut me off. So, in order to actually do this, we have to go back to a strategy of maximum pressure. I hope you'll work with your other countries here in G7 to actually do that. Can you commit today that this administration will not resume talks to enter in with Iran to enter the JCPOA?
Well, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals about our diplomacy. I can simply say that it was a big mistake to walk away from the JCPOA, because at least it took one problem off the table, which was Iran's nuclear program. Unfortunately, since we've moved out, Iran has turned that back on. And so that just adds to the threat that Iran poses.
Obviously, we're
going to
disagree on that.
One problem was a positive.
So we have one more minute. Secretary Austin, when we're looking at what is happening across the Middle East there, particularly with attacks on our troops, do you believe that Iran understands? We more recently heard this administration say that there is a red line. Do you believe that Iran understands what that red line is?
Senator Britt, we've been clear that that the protection of our troops is important, and we will do what's necessary to protect them. And this activity has to change. If it doesn't change, we will respond, and again, we'll respond at a time
of our choosing. Yes, and I just want to make sure that we have we been clear with Iran what that red line is? Do they understand that?
We have been clear about what I just said, Senator Britt.
Okay.
Thank you. Senator Manchin.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and thanks both of you all. It's been very enlightening, and it's been very interesting in hearing you all's approach on this. First of all, we know that Ukraine can't succeed without U.S. support. Can Israel succeed without U.S. support? Just yes or no very quickly on that. Either one.
That's correct. My assessment is that if the United States does not continue to support Ukraine, they will not succeed.
Right, but can Israel without our support?
That's right.
Can Israel make it without our support?
I think no. I think we have to continue to support them as they.
I'm just asking you questions that people are asking me. So they're saying, well, we've been giving $3 billion, and Israel's very advanced. Ukraine was not. We had to bring them up to speed to be able to fight their fight, and we're committed there. And Secretary Blinken,
I would simply say that on the one hand, Israel prides itself in being able to defend itself by itself, but a critical function of its ability to do that is the support that we provide, including through the memorandum of understanding that was negotiated by the Obama administration to give Israel historic levels of
support's not
defensive
only
support.
justified but needed. You're saying it'd be hard to take on all the fronts we're taking on without our support. Next of all, it brings me to the munitions. I know it's been asked about what we can produce. Is the United States running a risk, maybe not having enough to defend ourselves if we're pulled into any of these battles because of what we're basically producing? Are we producing enough here with the trusted allies and ourselves, producing enough ammunition to defend our own homeland and help our allies too?
Thanks, Senator. The first order of business for us is to make sure that we have the capability required to defend our nation and protect our interests.
Okay.
And then above and beyond that,
you think we're producing enough? we're ramping up. I know we're trying to.
Yes, we are ramping up, but if we had to only resource ourselves, yes, but we're at a point in time where we're resourcing allies and partners like Ukraine and Israel, and it's going to require more.
I'm just asking the question because people are asking me, are we running ourselves critically low on our own volume of what we need in our own basically inventory, or are we basically overproducing, or can we produce enough, or are we supplying more than what we can produce to backfill? That was a question. The other thing that's been asked to me, first of all, our commitment to win. Our track record hasn't been too good with Vietnam and basically Afghanistan, Ukraine getting out in end result. Are we committed to staying with this to win? Because I believe Ukraine is the most, I just think it's the purpose and the most honorable position we've ever taken in my lifetime of seeing that we were committed to playing the role the United States plays as a defender of freedom and liberties. And when you have a country willing to risk their own life and put their own people on the line, that's the least we can do to support them. So I'm all in on that. But are we committed to stay all the way through? And next of all, on our support to Israel. Israel's got to take out Hamas. Israel has to be supported to do that. And with that, are we committed to make sure that happens? So I think that leads into this final question. People have asked me, says, are the people in the Palestinian people in Gaza, are they committed to the cause, the Hamas's cause, basically, and that's why they're not leaving when we've basically been warned that you should leave? That they are being held hostage by Hamas? Can we not get aid to them, making sure it's being used for the purpose of their survivability? And can we not get them out of there? What's holding that back? Secretary Blinken.
We are committed to making sure that that Ukraine has what it needs to defend its sovereign territory. That's why we're here asking you for support.
No problem, but I'm just saying, is there a way to do that? Secretary Blinken, I know you've been over there quite a bit. Both of you all have been.
Senator, very quickly, the overwhelming majority of Palestinians living in Gaza are not part of Hamas, don't support Hamas, in fact, are subject to its repressive rule. But these are impoverished people who have virtually no opportunity and so no ability.
You're saying nowhere to go?
So very hard for them to move out of the way, although obviously we're working on that to try to get them out of harm's way. very little ability to provide for themselves, which is why we're trying to get assistance in. But ultimately, this is their land. We don't want to see them displaced.
Very
from their
quickly,
land.
the
We do
problem-
want to see
Yeah.
different governance.
The problem
in
that we
Gaza.
have, basically, we're saying that $10 billion for humanitarian aid, when we know we can't even get the aid that we're putting in there now going into the hands.
No, we can. No, we can, and we are. We're making sure that the assistance going in is going to the people who need it and deserve
Mr.
it,
Secretary,
not
I'm
people who
gonna,
don't.
I'm gonna
final-
inter-
my
I'm
final-
gonna interrupt tonight.
if I
I apologize to everyone. The Secretary
I know.
Blinken has said he has to leave. I respect that. Senator Austin, or Secretary Austin, has said he'd stay. We have four
Let me
senators who have not had a chance to ask anything. Senators Rubio, Van Hollen, Fisher, and Murkowski. If you will indulge me, I would like to ask each of those to ask quickly their question for Senator or for Secretary Blinken to respond to
Can
those.
I just have a final?
And Secretary Austin will be here and stay here to answer, and those four will call back on you in.
I have one final comment I want to make to both of y'all. This is a bipartisan. So when you hear all of my Republican colleagues saying about how important it is to secure our own borders, I want you to know it's bipartisan. I've got more concern about our own borders from my own people in West Virginia, and I want to make sure that you understand that we will do anything and everything humanly possible to support securing the borders of the United States of America.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Senator Rubio, Van Hollen, Fisher, and Murkowski to simply ask a question. Mr. Secretary, if you can respond to those together, and then I will call on all of you to ask Secretary Austin a question. Senator Rubio.
Well, since I only have one question, no one else is going to ask you about this, and it's unrelated to this matter, tangentially anyway. We recently did a deal with the Maduro regime in Venezuela, in which we lifted sanctions in exchange for free and fair elections that they were supposed to comply with. It's taken them 2 weeks now. They have violated that. They canceled the opposition's primary election, continue to ban their winner of that primary. They basically wiped out the election. They've broken the deal. Are we going to reimpose sanctions?
Senator Van Hollen, question, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, in the aftermath of the horror visited upon Israel by Hamas and the ongoing war in Gaza, much of the world has turned its eye away from what's happening on the West Bank. And what we're seeing, and our own folks on the ground have been reporting this on a daily basis, is that with support of extremists in the Netanyahu government, people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, extremist settler violence against Palestinians has skyrocketed as more Palestinians are pushed off their land in Area C. As you know, all this does is strengthen Hamas, undermine the already weak PA, and open another front in this war. I know the president has raised this issue with Prime Minister Netanyahu, but according to every report I get, and I know both you secretaries get these, we've seen no improvement. So my question is pretty simple. What is your plan beyond urging that something be done when our pleas continue to be ignored?
Senator Fisher, question, please. No question. Senator Murkowski.